On my 65th birthday, my son brought me to the village, dropped me off at a dilapidated house and said, "This is your gift. Live here." He drove away, leaving me in the wilderness, but he could not even imagine who lived in the neighboring house and was already on his way to help me. Hello, my dear listeners. Thank you for being here. I am always very interested to read from what cities and countries you listen to me, so feel free to write in the comments. And now get comfortable. Enjoy listening. I stood frozen on the broken porch steps, staring at the sagging roof and rotting shutters. The silence of the village pressed against me like a weight. Luke, my only child, had just abandoned me as if I were nothing more than a burden. The car's dust still hung in the air, settling slowly like ash after a fire. His words echoed in my ears, cutting deeper than any blade could. This is your gift. A gift. That was what he called it, my exile, my humiliation, my sentence to a place that looked more like a forgotten graveyard than a home. The house itself seemed to breathe decay. Its windows, with their cracked panes, looked at me like hollow eyes. The wooden boards of the porch bent beneath my weight, moaning in protest as if they, too, resented my presence. Paint had long ago surrendered to rain and wind, leaving the walls bare and splintered. Weeds curled around the foundation, reclaiming it inch by inch. Everything about it screamed abandonment, neglect, rejection. In that moment, I realized that Luke had chosen this place deliberately, with cruelty sharp enough to disguise itself as care. I wrapped my arms around myself, though the air was not cold. My body shivered anyway. Not from the weather, but from the brutal recognition of truth. I was not needed anymore. Not by the son I had raised, not by the life I had sacrificed for. When Luke was a boy, he used to cling to my hand on every walk, his small fingers trusting, his eyes always searching mine for comfort. I remember his first day of school, how he turned back at the gate, his lips trembling, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Don't go too far, Mom." And I didn't. I waited outside that school for hours, just so that when he came out, the first face he would see was mine. Now, decades later, on the very day meant to honor me, he had driven me to this hollow ruin and left me behind. No embrace, no celebration, no gratitude. Just a casual farewell, the sound of tires rolling away, and silence. My heart raced in my chest, but my legs felt weak, unable to decide whether to chase after his car or collapse entirely. I wanted to scream his name, to demand an explanation, to remind him of every sleepless night I spent sewing clothes so he could have something decent to wear, of every meal I skipped to save money for his textbooks, of every hour I endured in the factory so he could stand taller than me one day. But what good would it have done? His decision had already been made. I sank down on the porch step, the wood groaning under my weight, and stared at the dirt road stretching into the horizon. It twisted through the fields like a scar, disappearing into the distance where my son's car had gone. I strained my ears, hoping to hear the faint hum of the engine returning, hoping this was just some cruel prank or a moment of madness he would instantly regret. But the silence was unbroken, except for the caw of a crow perched on a nearby fence. That silence spoke more truth than words ever could. He wasn't coming back. Tears pricked my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in this place where even the trees leaned as if exhausted from standing too long. My pride was all I had left, and I clung to it fiercely, like a cloak shielding me from the nakedness of despair. The village itself seemed deserted. A handful of crooked rooftops dotted the distance, their chimneys lifeless. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and the faint echo of a barking dog far away. This was not a place for beginnings. It was a place where people came to disappear. And Luke, my son, had chosen it for me, chosen disappearance over dignity, exile over family, silence over love. As I looked at the house again, its doorway like a mouth waiting to swallow me, I realized that my birthday had not been marked by candles or cake, but by abandonment. This was not a gift. It was a burial. He had buried me alive in this village, expecting me to fade quietly into the background of broken fences and empty fields. I pressed my hand against my chest, feeling the uneven beat of my heart, each thump a reminder that I was still alive, still breathing, still capable of remembering, and perhaps one day of answering back. But for now, I sat among the ruins of my son's love, my body small against the vast wilderness, my soul crushed under the weight of betrayal. And yet, though I could not know it in that moment, salvation was already closer than I imagined. In the neighboring house, behind walls that did not sag and windows that did not break, someone was stirring. Someone who would change everything. I dragged my small suitcase across the weeds, its tiny wheels snagged on stones and tufts of grass, rattling like bones in the silence. Every step I took pressed my betrayal deeper into the earth, marking the ground with my shame. When the porch groaned beneath me, the sound was not only wood under strain, it was my heart splintering all over again. I had raised Luke alone after his father died. I remember standing by that hospital bed, clutching his father's cold hand, promising silently that I would protect our boy no matter what. I walked out of that room with grief gnawing my ribs, but I swore I would turn my pain into strength. I was mother and father both, worker and caretaker, shield and compass. I took jobs that crushed my bones and left my hands raw. Double shifts in the factory, my body bent over humming machines until my back ached so much I couldn't stand straight. I packed lunches in paper bags, tucking in notes that said, "I love you," in childish scrawls, because I wanted Luke to carry me with him, even when I wasn't there. I sold the jewelry his father once gave me. Delicate gold earrings, my wedding ring, a necklace that carried memories of our youth. All of it gone, turned into cash so I could buy Luke his first car. I can still picture his joy. The way he rushed to hug me, the smell of gasoline and new leather mixing with his laughter. I thought I had given him not just a vehicle, but wings. I thought he would soar higher than me, freer than me. And yet, here I was on my 65th birthday, standing in front of a crumbling house, abandoned by that same son, as if I were no more than dead weight on his shoulders. Hatred rose in my chest, hot and suffocating. Not just for Luke's cruelty, but for myself. How had I not seen it sooner? How had I mistaken selfishness for ambition, arrogance for confidence, indifference for independence? How had I ignored the little signs, the way he took without ever giving back? I thought of the Christmases when I scraped coins together to buy him the latest toy, while I wrapped my own feet in newspaper inside worn-out boots to keep them from freezing. I thought of the birthdays where I stretched one cake to feed a room of noisy boys, so Luke could hold his head high in front of friends, while I ate the crumbs in the kitchen. I thought of the nights I came home after 14 hours at work, my arms trembling, my lungs burning, only to find him sprawled on the couch, whining about how other kids had more than he did. I excused it all. I told myself he was just young, that he would grow out of it. I believed that once he saw the world clearly, once he had a family of his own, he would understand the cost of sacrifice. I waited for that moment like a gardener waits for rain, but it never came. Instead, the boy I had shielded from hunger, from humiliation, from poverty, grew into a man who humiliated me, who abandoned me, who left me standing in the dust with nothing but a suitcase of clothes and the echo of his engine disappearing down the road. The weeds clawed at my ankles as I moved, their scratchy touch reminding me how low I had been cast. This was not a new home. This was an exile. Luke had not given me shelter. He had given me a grave without walls, a place where the living are discarded to wait for death. And he had done it with a smile, with the gall to call it a gift. My hatred thickened, turned heavy, pressing against my ribs like a stone. But it wasn't wild or reckless. It was sharp, precise, focused. Hatred has a way of clarifying the world, stripping away illusions until all that remains is the raw, ugly truth. And the truth was this. My son did not see me as a mother, not as a woman who had bowled and bent for him, but as an obstacle, an inconvenience, something to be cleared out of the way. I thought back to the man he once was, or perhaps the man I once believed he was. The boy who cried when he scraped his knees, who begged me to sing to him when nightmares kept him awake, who hugged me so tightly after his father's funeral that I thought my ribs would crack. Where had that boy gone? Had he ever truly existed? Or had I only seen what I wanted to see? A gust of wind rattled the shutters of the abandoned house, the sound snapping me back to the present. My suitcase toppled over, spilling open, and I stared at the pathetic bundle of clothes tumbling onto the dirt. That was all I had now. Some clothes, some shoes, a few photos tucked in between. My entire life reduced to fabric and fading paper. Hatred burned hotter. For Luke, yes, but also for my blindness, my endless hope, my foolishness. I had built him into something he never was, and now, at 65, I was left to face the ruins of that illusion. I pressed my lips together, forcing back the tears that threatened to spill. Tears were a waste now. Tears would not rebuild what had been destroyed. I told myself in that moment that I would not forgive him. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Hatred was all I had left, and it was strong enough to keep me standing on that porch instead of crumpling into the dust. Just as I sat on the suitcase, my body heavy with the weight of humiliation, a sound broke the silence. The old iron gate across the dirt road creaked open, its hinges straining like a groan from the earth itself. My head snapped up. A man stepped out, tall and steady, with silver hair that gleamed faintly in the dying light, and eyes so sharp and blue they seemed to slice through the dusk. He didn't rush toward me. He didn't call out immediately. He simply stood there for a breath, his gaze fixed, his body still. Then, in a voice calm but edged with something, curiosity, recognition, maybe even disbelief, he said, "Julia Carter." My heart lurched. I blinked rapidly, my throat tightening. "Yes, do I know you?" The words scraped out of me, half whisper, half defensive bark, because my mind could not place him, and yet something deep inside me stirred. His lips curved into a faint smile. "It's Gerald Anderson. We were in high school together." The name crashed into me like thunder splitting the sky. Gerald Anderson. The boy who once walked me home under oak trees when the evenings grew too dark. The boy who slid folded notes into my locker, words scribbled in ink that smelled faintly of gasoline from his father's garage. The boy whose letters I once kept hidden in a shoebox, reading them by lamplight when loneliness pressed against my ribs like an uninvited guest. For a second, I could not breathe. The village fell away, the broken shutters, the weeds, even the echo of Luke's abandonment, all of it blurred as memory surged forward. I saw him as he once was, dark hair falling into his eyes, hands rough from working odd jobs, smile crooked but warm enough to thaw even the harshest winter day. Gerald. The name slipped past my lips before I could stop it, carrying years of silence within its sound. He nodded, the smile deepening, though time had etched lines around his mouth and eyes. "It's been a long time." Long time. That was too simple for what it had been. Decades had unspooled since the last moment I saw him, standing at the edge of the bus station in his uniform, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, promising he would write. And he had for a while. Letters filled with stories of training, of faraway cities, of loneliness that mirrored my own. Then, one day, the letters stopped. I told myself life had swallowed him whole. Perhaps he had found someone else. Perhaps he had simply moved on. I buried him in the quiet graveyard of memory and learned not to visit too often. And now, impossibly, he was here, in this forgotten village, standing across from me as if no time at all had passed. The air between us vibrated with questions I couldn't form. What was he doing here? Why now, after all these years? Why in this place on this day, when my son had just cut me from his life like an unwanted thread? I studied him closely. His frame was broad, stronger than I remembered, though softened by age. His silver hair lent him a dignity he hadn't had as a boy. And his eyes. Oh, those eyes were the same piercing blue that once looked at me as if I were the only person in a crowded room. Time had weathered him, but it had not erased him. If anything, it had carved him deeper into the world. I felt exposed under his gaze, as though he could see the entire story of my suffering written on my face. The widowhood, the years of labor, the loneliness, and now this fresh abandonment. I wanted to turn away, to hide, but his presence rooted me to the spot. I can't believe it's you," I finally whispered. My voice trembled, but it carried the truth, disbelief mixed with something dangerously close to relief. He tilted his head, studying me with that same unreadable expression. "I wasn't sure it was you at first, but then I saw the way you moved, the way you held yourself. Some things don't change." I let out a shaky laugh, bitter and warm at the same time. "Plenty has changed, Gerald. More than I can put into words." He didn't answer right away. His eyes lingered on the sagging house behind me, on the suitcase at my side, on the lines etched into my face. I saw his jaw tighten ever so slightly, as though he understood more than I was ready to say. Memories tumbled over each other in my mind, prom nights I never attended, summer fairs where I watched him from a distance, that one stolen dance in the school gym when the music drowned out our fears. He had been the boy who almost was, the life I almost lived. And now he was here, not as a memory, but as a man of flesh and bone, standing in front of me when everything else in my life had just crumbled. The strangeness of it left me dizzy. Fate had taken Luke away from me in the cruelest of ways, and in the same breath it had returned someone I thought I had lost forever. I didn't know whether to weep, to smile, or to run. But I stayed rooted to the suitcase, staring across the dusty road at the man who had once held pieces of my heart. And as the silence stretched between us, I realized that my story had just shifted. I didn't know how or why, but the ground beneath me no longer felt like a grave. It felt like something waiting to be uncovered. Gerald carried my suitcase inside his home as though it weighed nothing. My steps followed his automatically, but my mind stumbled in disbelief. The man I had last seen in the blur of youth was now here, steady, grounded, holding the pieces of me my own son had just shattered. When the door shut behind us, I braced myself for more decay, for another house left to rot. Instead, I stopped short, my breath catching. The inside was nothing like the weathered, peeling exterior. A fire snapped and hissed in the hearth, flames throwing gold against the polished wood floor. Shelves of books climbed the walls, their spines worn but lovingly kept. A woven rug stretched beneath my feet, its deep colors muted with age, but still alive with pattern. It felt warm, safe, alive, as though someone had poured years of care into these walls, sealing them against the ruin outside. The air smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, familiar and comforting. My shoulders, knotted tight for days, began to ease just a little. It felt wrong to feel comfort so soon after betrayal, and yet, sitting in that room, I could not deny it. I felt like I had stepped into a sanctuary. Gerald set the suitcase down in a quiet corner and gestured toward a chair by the fire. "Sit. You look like the weight of the world's on your shoulders." I lowered myself into the chair, its cushion swallowing me in unexpected softness. My hands shook slightly as I pressed them into my lap. I did not realize how empty and cold I had felt until warmth wrapped around me now. My throat tightened, tears pressing close, not from grief this time, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being cared for. Gerald busied himself with the kettle, his movements slow, deliberate, as though he had done this ritual 1,000 times. The whistle rose, sharp and quick, before he poured steaming water over tea leaves, the scent of chamomile filling the air. He placed the cup before me with a steadiness that anchored me, then sat across from me, his eyes fixed on mine. He said nothing. He didn't prod or rush. He simply waited. And in that silence, the words broke from me like a flood. I told him everything. I told him how Luke had driven me to the village on my birthday, how he had pointed to that sagging ruin across the road and dared to call it a gift. I told him of the sound of his tires rolling away, the silence that followed, the taste of abandonment that still clung to my tongue. My voice cracked as I recounted the years of sacrifice, the double shifts at the factory, the jewelry I pawned, the nights I starved quietly so Luke could eat well. I spoke of the pride I felt at his college graduation, the joy of seeing him step into the world with everything I had never had. And then I spoke of the bitterness, how each sacrifice had been forgotten, erased, tossed aside like I was nothing but a shadow at his heels. With every confession, my shame threatened to choke me. I hated myself for raising him poorly, for shielding him too much, for mistaking selfishness for ambition. I hated the blindness that had led me here, suitcase in hand, abandoned like unwanted luggage. Gerald listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to soften the edges of my story. He sat still, shoulders square, his jaw tightening with each detail. His eyes, though sharp, softened when they lingered on me. I saw the firelight catch in them, the reflection of my own pain mirrored back. When I finished, silence stretched between us again. My chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, the tea before me untouched, gone cold. My throat burned raw, scraped by words I had never dared to speak aloud to anyone else. Finally, Gerald leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, his voice low but firm. "Julia, he has no idea who he's dealing with." The certainty in his tone startled me. I lifted my eyes, blinking against the tears that still blurred my vision. "You've carried more on your back than most men I've met," he continued. "You survived widowhood, raised a son alone, worked yourself to the bone. And after all that, he thought he could break you with this? No." His jaw clenched. "No, Julia, you're not alone anymore." Something in the way he said it, unshakable, as if it were carved into stone, made my chest tighten. For the first time since Luke left me in the dust, I felt the faintest stirring of strength. The words were simple, but they wrapped around me like a shield. The fire crackled, filling the silence that followed. My tears slipped free then, not heavy sobs, but quiet streams, releasing years of unspoken grief. And Gerald didn't look away. He let me cry, let me unravel, let me be seen, not as a burden, not as a failure, but as a woman whose life still mattered. In that moment, I understood the depth of compassion. Not pity, not hollow comfort, but presence. Someone sitting with you in the ashes, refusing to leave. In the days that followed, Gerald slowly unfolded pieces of himself I had never known. The man who had stepped out of that creaking gate was not only the boy I remembered from youth, not only the soldier I vaguely recalled hearing about in passing years. He was something else entirely. It happened one evening when the fire burned low, throwing long shadows across the rug. I had been staring into the flames, thinking of Luke's voice, the echo of his cruelty still lodged in my chest, when Gerald spoke. "Julia," he said, his voice steady, "you don't know the full story of who I am." I turned toward him, eyebrows drawn together, unsure whether I was prepared for more surprises. He leaned back in his chair, fingers laced loosely in front of him. "When I left the army, I didn't just disappear. I built a life. Investments, properties, land. I bought buildings in towns that people had written off, and I rebuilt them. Sold some, kept some. One after another, year after year." His blue eyes narrowed slightly, studying my reaction. "I came back here to live simply, but make no mistake, Julia, right now I have more influence and power than most of the men sitting in the state capitol." I stared at him, my lips parting but no words coming out. My mind reeled, trying to reconcile the man before me with the boy I once knew. I had expected a retired soldier, maybe a man with a small pension, maybe even a man just surviving. Not this. Not someone who had quietly built a fortune while I spent decades breaking my back for pennies. For a long moment, the silence between us roared louder than firewood crackling in the hearth. I felt the shock coil inside me, twisting into something heavier, an awareness that I had underestimated him, that the world had underestimated him. "Why tell me this now?" I asked finally, my voice low, uncertain. His gaze softened. "Because you need to know you're not alone. Because your son," he paused, his jaw tightening, "your son thinks you have no one, that you're powerless. But that's not true. Not anymore." His words struck deep, but before they could settle, the shrill ring of the telephone shattered the air. I froze, knowing even before I answered who it would be. I lifted the receiver, pressing it to my ear, and there it was. Luke's voice, sharp, impatient, dripping with arrogance. "Mom, you'll be getting your pension soon. Wire me half. Angela and I have expenses." The casual cruelty in his tone made my stomach turn. I gripped the receiver tighter. "Luke," I said slowly, "do you hear yourself? Do you remember where you left me?" He laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "Oh, come on. You've got a roof over your head, don't you? You're fine. Just send me the money, or I'll stop answering your calls." My breath caught, rage bubbling up, searing through my veins. He had abandoned me, humiliated me, discarded me, and now he dared to bleed me dry, as if I were nothing but an endless reservoir to fund his comfort. I wanted to scream, to hurl words so sharp they would cut through the phone line and pierce his heart. Instead, I stayed silent, every muscle trembling with the effort of holding back. "Mom, did you hear me?" His impatience snapped like a whip. "Half your pension. Don't make me repeat myself." I slammed the receiver down, the sound ringing through the room like a gunshot. My chest heaved, my hands shook, but beneath it all was a fury so clean, so pure, it felt like fire forged into steel. Gerald's eyes were on me, steady, unreadable. What did he say? I could barely form the words. He wants half. Half of what little I have left, or he'll cut me off completely. For a heartbeat, Gerald said nothing. Then his expression hardened, his jaw locking. Entitlement. That's what happens when someone is given everything and taught nothing about its cost. I pressed my palms against my thighs, trying to still the tremor in my body. Memories surged. Nights spent stitching clothes until my fingers bled, meals skipped so Luke could eat, the sound of my bones aching after double shifts. All of it, every sacrifice I made, was invisible to him. To him, I was just a source, a bank, an inconvenience. The anger in me rose higher, hotter, until it pressed against my skin like it might burst out. Hatred I thought had already peaked deepened, taking root, sharper, darker. How could he? I whispered. After everything, how could he? Gerald didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence was agreement, acknowledgement, confirmation of the truth I could no longer avoid. Luke wasn't misguided, wasn't just careless. He was cruel, and cruelty was deliberate. I sat in that room, the fire popping softly, my body trembling not with fear, but with fury. Shock still lingered at Gerald's revelation, awe at his hidden fortune and quiet power. But it was Luke's voice that consumed me, his demand, his entitlement, his absolute disregard for the woman who had given him everything. I realized then that anger was no longer something I could suppress. It was fuel, and though I didn't yet know what I would do with it, I knew one thing. Luke had underestimated me. He thought I was weak, discarded, finished. But the blood in my veins burned hotter than it had in years, and it carried a new truth, one that frightened even me. Gerald leaned forward across the table one evening, the fire casting half his face in gold, the other in shadow. His eyes were steady, his voice low, but there was a steel edge in it. If Luke wants money, he said, let's show him what greed costs. The words struck me with the weight of a gavel. For days, my fury had churned without direction, eating me alive. Now, suddenly, it sharpened into something useful. Anger was no longer just an ache in my chest. It became a tool. I nodded slowly, my fingers curling around the edge of the table. Then let him come, I whispered. Let him see what he thinks he's entitled to, and let him choke on it. The plan unfolded piece by piece, careful, deliberate, like a chessboard filling with pawns and knights. Gerald was methodical, his mind working with the same precision that must have carried him through war and business alike. He already had files, more than I could have imagined. Records showing Luke's quiet thefts from my accounts. Documents with my forged signature, authorization slips he had tricked me into signing years ago, when my eyes were weaker and my trust stronger. Even the digital trail, screenshots of his text messages, demands, threats, every word dripping with entitlement. Gerald had gathered it all, silently, as if he had known that one day this moment would come. Greed blinds men, Gerald said as he stacked the papers neatly on the table. He'll come dressed as a prince, thinking himself clever. He won't realize he's already walking into a cage. I felt a strange calmness settle over me, the kind that comes when grief hardens into resolve. My heart still ached for the boy I once carried on my hip, but that boy no longer existed. What remained was a man so consumed by hunger for wealth that he had cut his own mother out of his life. If this was who he had chosen to be, then I would let him drown in the very greed he worshipped. I picked up the telephone the next morning, my hand steady as I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his voice slick, impatient. "Mom? About time. Did you send the money?" "No, Luke," I said evenly, forcing a softness into my tone. "I haven't sent it yet, but I may have found someone who can help us both. A neighbor. He's wealthy." I could almost hear his breath catch on the other end. His tone shifted instantly, oiled with charm. "Wealthy, you say? Who? How much are we talking about?" I closed my eyes, suppressing the disgust rising in me. "Enough. He's interested in meeting you. Come to the village. Bring Angela, if you'd like. He'll explain it himself. For a beat, there was silence. Then, with a hint of laughter in his voice, Luke said, "Well, Mom, maybe you're not as useless as I thought." I hung up before the anger could force me to spit the truth down the line. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with the raw, cutting thrill of a trap beginning to close. Days later, he arrived. I saw the dust rise from the road before I saw the car. A sleek black sedan rolled into the village like it did not belong, its polished metal reflecting the sun in arrogant flashes. Luke stepped out first, straightening his pressed suit jacket, his tie gleaming red as if he had chosen the color to shout power. Angela followed, her heels clicking sharply against the dirt, her eyes scanning the village with disdain, as though the very air here offended her. They carried themselves like royalty arriving at a peasant's festival, smiling wide but with hunger beneath the teeth. Their eyes darted toward Gerald's house, measuring, calculating. I recognized that look. It was the same one Luke had worn as a boy in candy stores, eyes bigger than his pockets. He embraced me stiffly, his cologne cloying, unfamiliar. "Mom," he said loudly, as though the whole village were watching. "You look, well." But his eyes slid past me quickly, already searching for the promise of money. Angela gave me a thin smile, the kind that held no warmth. So this is the place Luke told me about. Quaint. The word landed like an insult. I felt my lips tighten, but I said nothing. The act had begun, and I would play my part. Gerald opened his door just then, his figure filling the frame, his silver hair catching the light. For the briefest moment, Luke faltered, his smile flickering. Gerald had a presence about him, the kind that made men stand straighter, women quieter. "Welcome," Gerald said smoothly, his voice both polite and commanding. "Come in. We have much to discuss." Luke's grin returned, wider now, forced. He straightened his tie again, and Angela tucked her arm into his. They walked toward the door like guests entering a banquet, unaware that the table waiting for them was set not with riches, but with their own corruption. And as I watched them step inside, my anger hardened into something sharper, cleaner. This was no longer just pain or betrayal. This was justice awakening, slow and unstoppable. Inside Gerald's drawing room, the air felt heavy, charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. The fire snapped in the hearth, but its warmth did nothing to soften the tension gathering between us. Luke sank into a leather armchair, legs crossed, hands folded with practiced ease. A smile tugged at his mouth, thin, smug, confident. "So, Mom," he drawled, his tone syrupy but hollow. "This man is rich. Maybe he'll help us invest." His eyes flicked to Gerald, sharp with calculation, already seeing not a person but an opportunity. Gerald did not return the smile. His eyes, cold and unyielding, hardened like stone. His voice cut through the air with finality. "Your mother doesn't need to invest in you. She needs protection from you." The words landed like a crack across Luke's face. His grin faltered, his brow furrowed, confusion flickering for the briefest second before arrogance quickly patched over the crack. "Protection?" He scoffed, leaning forward. "From me? She's my mother." Gerald didn't blink. He reached for the folder waiting on the table beside him, his movements calm, deliberate, precise. One by one, he laid out the evidence. Papers rustled, photographs slipped into place, documents spread across the polished wood like weapons in an arsenal. First, the bank statements. Luke's withdrawals, his transfers, the neat trail of digits siphoned from my account into his. Next, the forged documents, slips of paper bearing my shaky signature, signatures I had never written, authorization forms manipulated to look legitimate. Then came the text messages, printed screenshots, words in black and white that dripped with greed and entitlement. Send me half your pension or don't call me again. You owe me. Without me, you're nothing. If you loved me, you'd sign it. Each page was another strike, another nail in the coffin of his carefully maintained image. Luke's face drained of color. His hands twitched, fists clenching, unclenching. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The mask of charm cracked wide now, showing panic beneath the surface. Beside him, Angela's eyes widened, her lips parting in disbelief. She looked at the papers, then at Luke, then back again, her hand flying to her mouth. Luke, what is this? Her voice trembled, sharp with betrayal. Luke stammered, reaching for her hand, but she pulled away, her expression twisting with disgust. You told me your mother was exaggerating, that she was manipulative. You said she drained you. Her words grew sharper with each syllable, the firelight glinting off the anger now rising in her. But this is you. This is your handwriting, your number. You stole from her. I rose to my feet, my body trembling, not with fear anymore, but with fury long held in silence, finally erupting into flame. My voice cracked the air, louder than I had ever spoken to my son. You left me on my birthday, Luke, in the mud. You dropped me at a broken house and drove away like I was garbage you no longer wanted. You called it a gift. My chest heaved, words spilling out like fire. But today everyone sees who you really are. The room vibrated with my anger, every syllable echoing like thunder. My hands shook, but not from weakness. They shook from strength. Rage turned solid. Rage turned into a weapon of truth. Luke scrambled, his voice breaking, desperate now. Mom, listen. It's not what it looks like. Gerald, he's twisting this. He doesn't care about you. He's using you. Enough. My voice cut across his lies, sharp and final. For years, I convinced myself you would change. I excused your arrogance, your greed, your coldness. I told myself you were still my son. But a son who abandons his mother, who steals from her, who treats her like dirt, is no son at all. Angela stood abruptly, the chair legs screeching against the floor. Her eyes blazed with fury, not at me, but at the man she thought she knew. I married a liar, she spat. A parasite. Luke's mask shattered completely then. Sweat glistened on his forehead, his jaw slack, his charm gone. He looked not like the polished man who had stepped into Gerald's house, but like a cornered animal, frantic, exposed. I stood taller, my voice steady now, almost calm. The truth is here, Luke. The world will see you for what you are. Not a victim, not a son, a leech, a coward, a man stripped bare by his own greed. The fire snapped loudly, sparks leaping upward, as though the flames themselves applauded the unveiling. Gerald's papers lay spread like a battlefield, each piece of evidence a victory, each word of mine a final strike. Luke could no longer hide. His face told the story his lips refused to form. His empire of lies, built on arrogance and entitlement, crumbled in front of him, brick by brick, while I, his mother, stood to watch its fall. And for the first time in years, I felt power in my bones. Not the power of wealth, not the power of control, but the power of truth, sharp and undeniable, cutting through deception like a blade through cloth. This was the moment anger ceased to be my burden. This was the moment anger became my weapon. The storm broke with a swiftness that stunned even me. One moment, Luke was still weaving excuses, grasping at lies like a drowning man clutching reeds. The next, Gerald's lawyer stepped into the light with evidence sharp enough to cut through every pretense. Folders thick with proof moved from desk to desk, from office to office, until they landed in the hands of men and women whose signatures decided fates. There was no room for denial. Luke's theft, his forgery, his threats, they stood naked on paper, undeniable, irreversible. His downfall began not with a scream, but with silence. The silence of doors that no longer opened to him, of phones that no longer answered his calls. The silence of a world that had discovered who he really was. His job was the first to go. Executives who once shook his hand with easy smiles now kept their distance, unwilling to stain their reputations with his name. I heard the news through whispers first, then through headlines. Financial advisor terminated amid scandal. His photo sat beneath the words, his polished smile now a mask no one believed. His reputation collapsed next. Friends vanished, allies scattered, even his neighbors turned their backs. Angela, once radiant to his side, became a ghost in his story. She filed for divorce swiftly, her lawyer citing fraud, deception, and cruelty. She did not fight him. She did not defend him. She walked away, disgust etched into her face. And so the man who had abandoned me in the mud found himself drowning in it, alone, disgraced, stripped of every illusion of power. His downfall was public, humiliating, and irreversible. But this story was never just about Luke's fall. It was about my rise. For the first time in years, I felt lightness in my chest, not because the pain had vanished, but because it no longer owned me. Justice had taken root where despair once lived, and it bloomed fiercely, filling me with strength I had forgotten I possessed. As the dust of his ruin settled, I looked across the table at Gerald, the man who had stood by me when no one else had. He had carried me across the threshold of despair into something steadier, something alive. What began as the shock of reunion grew into a steady flame, companionship, trust, and something deeper that pulsed between us with every shared glance. He became more than my ally. He became my partner. My shield when anger threatened to drown me, my anchor when memory pulled me under, my reminder that life was not finished with me yet. With Gerald, the village no longer felt like exile. It felt like refuge. His house, once just shelter, became a home filled with warmth I thought had died with my husband. The sound of his footsteps in the hallway, the sight of him tending the fire, the quiet weight of his hand brushing against mine. Each small detail wove a new fabric for my life, stronger than the old, richer than what I thought I had lost forever. And so the story turned. Luke had abandoned me, yes, but fate had placed me where I needed to be. In front of a crumbling house, I had believed my life was ending. But across the road stood a man who reminded me that endings are sometimes disguised beginnings. Luke's betrayal had stripped me of illusions, but in doing so, it carved space for truth, for dignity, for love renewed in a form I never expected. His cruelty became the soil from which my strength grew. His downfall was not just punishment. It was proof that justice has a way of circling back, of finding those who deserve it, and of lifting those who endured. I no longer wept for the boy I had raised, the man who chose greed over love. I released him to the path he had carved for himself, a path lined with the ruins of his own making. My tears had dried, my anger burned clean, leaving only clarity. I had given him life, but I did not owe him mine. What I had instead was a new chapter, one where I was not a burden, not forgotten, not discarded, one where my days were no longer measured by loneliness, but by the quiet companionship of someone who understood both my past and my worth. Luke left me in a village near a crumbling house, thinking he had ended me. But fate, strange, merciful fate, gave me something far greater, a neighbor who became my salvation, my strength, my partner. And as I sat by Gerald's fire, my hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, I realized that justice was not only in Luke's ruin. Justice was in my survival, in my rebirth, in the dignity he could never steal. Justice was in the love I thought I had lost, returned to me when I needed it most. Yes, Luke had abandoned me, but fate gave me everything I deserved, and more.